And I'm very happy to introduce you to our webinar this month. LAMSIG, the Leadership and Management Special Interest Group at IATEFL, which I'm the coordinator of, we run about 3 webinars a year, and we're very happy that Vincinius Nobre from Brazil, from Sao Paulo, is here with us today. Vinny, I met Vinny the first time probably about 5 or 6 years ago at IATEFL. We've seen each other a fair few times at IATEFL, and used to work for Cultura Inglesa, and recently has started up with a couple of colleagues his own educational consultancy company called Troika, which he may well mention to you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Vinny. I'm going to now get out of the way and leave Vinny in charge. I'll take my camera out of the way so you can just see Vinny, not me, and just hear Vinny. So thanks very much for all of you for coming. Welcome to those of you who are here. And go ahead, Vinny. Take it away.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Is my audio working? Can you? Okay, yes. Great, lovely, wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank Andy very much for the invitation and everyone from the Leadership and Management SIG. It's a real pleasure to be here talking to you about a topic that is very dear to me, and I understand it is a topic that can be quite controversial sometimes when we talk about education, because performance indicators have been used in management and administration for several years, and there are many companies that use performance indicators quite often and regularly. But when it comes to education, there is still a lot of debate on how they can be used, if they are valid as a tool, and the best way to implement them. So in this webinar, my objective is to share with you a little bit some of my experience having worked with performance indicators and having implemented a policy that revolved around the use of performance indicators in language centers. And I'm going to share what I believe in and maybe raise some questions and hopefully help you look at performance indicators from a different perspective and how they can be used to assess the effectiveness of any organization. So the first thing that I would like to say is that we need to look at education as a subject that has been changing quite a lot. The way that we manage education, the way that we look at education has been changing throughout the years. Maybe not as fast as other subject matters, technology, medicine. These are areas that have been changing much faster and more dramatically, let's say. But education has been changing as well. The way we do things, the expectations and the demands, both from the organizations and the teachers and the students too. So we need to look at how we can follow these changes and adapt the way that we manage and deal with some of the processes and procedures in order to keep evolving and doing something different. I've been teaching and involved with teaching for over 20 years, for 23 years. And for many years, I was never exposed to performance indicators. I had never heard of performance indicators. I worked in many places that would only assess performance based on very subjective criteria. So whether you were an effective teacher or whether things were working, projects were working or not, these decisions and these perceptions, they came from a very subjective personal opinion. For about maybe 10, 12 years, I have been working more closely with performance indicators. And whenever I had to implement a performance indicator framework or work with performance indicators and teachers, this was always perceived as a big change. And change change can make people uncomfortable. So that's one of the things that we're going to look at, because if education is changing, we also need to change the way we do certain things. And how is education changing exactly? In the Summit of Americas, they say that although it is now part of daily life in schools and in debates between specialists, education assessment has recently become a relevant topic for governments and society, especially because of the economic crisis, the acceleration of the globalization process, which made investments in education a strategic point while the resources available for the sector have shrunk. When we think about resources available for the sector shrinking, one of the resources that I want to point out is the human resource. At least in my context, and from what I know in many places, it has become harder and harder to find teachers. And how do we assess the effectiveness of these teachers, for example? We have been experimenting with different media, online courses, blended learning. How do we know if the investment that is made in this technology, in this way of doing things, in this way of teaching and learning, how do we know if the investment that sometimes can be quite significant is actually giving us the return that we expect? As I mentioned, historically, assessing education and the way that education is managed was done very informally, very organically. And now I think that there is this debate, there is this need to try and look at how the money is invested by having parameters that are more reliable, that are more consistent than just a feeling, just an opinion. So, during the last decade, education systems throughout the world have been subject to considerable reform and change. This is a fact. We have been changing the way we teach. We have been changing processes and procedures overall. All justified on the grounds of improving the quality of school education. So there is a lot of debate regarding how do we improve the quality of education of schools. A key feature of this change has been the frequent revisions of style and policy focus. In which area specifically? In the area of performance indicators. The major emphasis has been placed on the assessment and the monitoring of students' learning outcomes. What does that mean exactly? We have been trying to change the way we educate, but in order to know if these changes are actually causing a good impact in the learning of students, we need some tool, we need something that will inform us. The whole idea of implementing performance indicators is not just to measure the outcome and stop there, but rather to inform us about whether the expected outcome was reached or not, so that this information can be used for further planning, for further strategic planning. And when we monitor the student learning outcomes, we become more aware of whether we are going the right way or the wrong way. However, assessing and monitoring student learning outcomes can be a rather challenging thing to do. In many places, student learning outcomes will be measured through the results in the tests that they have, for example. In other places, by how many of them pass a certificate, they get a specific certificate. So, and there are a lot of, let's say, inconsistencies when it comes to the validity of this performance indicator alone. What I'm going to try and show you today is that we can rely on a combination of performance indicators to inform our decisions as managers, and not just isolate one specific factor to assess and monitor student outcomes and say students are learning better, are learning faster or not. For us to assess and monitor student learning outcomes, we need a combination of indicators and not just one single indicator to let us know how things are going. One of the things that I personally would add to the assessment of our performance as an institution, for example, is not just the outcome in terms of how much students learned, but also the quality of the teaching. Again, it can be quite controversial, but it is my belief that not always the quality of the teaching will immediately generate better results in a test, for example, especially the way that the testing and assessment system has been implemented in many places. There are tests that don't really test what they are supposed to test. So looking at only the result that the students get in a test may not inform us sufficiently. And we know now that good teaching matters. It's not just the material. You can have a by-the-book methodology. You can have a system for students to study that is very detailed and very controlled. What will impact and make a big difference in the whole process is the quality of the teaching. And how do we measure the teaching? Not just by the grades that students get in the test. That's my point. Good teaching really matters, and research has shown that the quality of instruction is the single most important factor in student achievement. Now, if we have an issue, for example, with the testing system, how do you know if the achievement that we are talking about is genuine? So we need, in my opinion, to also look at the quality of the teaching as an isolated performance indicator, for example. So my big point here is we need to get different performance indicators to analyze the holistic experience of students and teachers to assess whether our investment is can be justified or not. So when we implement a policy, a framework that revolves around performance indicators, one of the first things that we need to observations. Yes, Karen, I'll talk about this, absolutely. One of the things that we need to bear in mind is that implementing performance indicators can impact and will probably impact teachers' motivation, especially if you implement a framework for performance indicators without very careful planning, taking into consideration how teachers are going to feel about it. The whole point behind implementing performance indicators is to have better outcomes. If the implementation of the performance indicators is not carried out in a way that teachers will buy the idea, will feel comfortable with the process, will remain or become even more motivated with the process, the whole thing will backfire. So you will have a great system for performance indicators to assess and monitor the performance of students and of the teaching overall. But the results will probably be affected by the fact that teachers are demotivated and resisting that system. Teachers and human beings will naturally resist change. However, there are things that we can do in order to minimize resistance and generate engagement. One of the things that we have to do when we think about implementing performance indicators and taking into consideration teachers' motivation is the fact that teachers need to be involved throughout the process. Teachers need to agree and, if possible, make their contributions when it comes to selecting the performance indicators that are really relevant to that context. So I will mention very soon suggestions of possible performance indicators. Depending on where you teach and how you teach, some performance indicators will not be relevant. So there is no secret recipe. There is nothing that is set in stone. It really depends on the context. And since the teachers know the context really well, and since you want the teachers to be involved in the process in a positive way, it is extremely important that we ask them what they consider to be the indicators that will genuinely inform performance. Evidence, and why is it important, okay? And why do we have to focus on the resistance that there might be? Because evidence shows that the transformative leadership concept and movement didn't work. What was the transformative leadership movement and concept? That we need to engage everybody without necessarily monitoring and assessing results. We need to give everyone a purpose, an objective, and get everyone to work together to generate better results. There are a lot of very good things in this idea. However, what was found was that just creating the general and inspiring vision or instilling the motivation in teachers to join a cause, that's not specific enough to produce actual results. So a combination of having an inspiring vision, instilling motivation, but also setting more pragmatic frameworks that will inform and will help you assess the effectiveness of that inspiration, of the projects and the policies that are implemented. A combination of these two things is extremely important, and in my opinion is the best way to really get real results. Because just mobilizing teachers to be passionate about something, committed to something, without having indicators that will also assess the performance, as uncomfortable as it might be, will limit a lot the impact of the leadership. So it is common, and we assume that teachers like changes, right? The teachers will look at the performance indicators and say, fine, we have something to learn. And why am I talking so much about resistance? Well, first of all, because it's commonly believed that because one works in the realm of education, one is open to learning new things. Unfortunately, this is not always the case. Often, educators are even more resistant to tackling something new, which is ironic, when one of the primary purposes of education is to teach students the value of learning. Why am I talking so much about this? Because for performance indicators to truly work, teachers need to buy the idea. But we can't ignore the fact that it's the nature of human beings. And when it comes to teachers, research shows, and you can see it in the slide, research shows that resistance is even greater when it comes to learning something new. So when we consider all of these things, we can better plan how to, we anticipate problems and can better plan how to solve these problems. Just understanding the importance of performance indicators and designing a good plan for performance indicators, overlooking the fact that we need to take into consideration teacher engagement, teacher resistance, teacher involvement, will probably make the whole performance indicator principle fail. So by analyzing that performance indicators can inform change, and by informing change, we are generating knowledge and further learning. And teachers usually resist learning and resist something new. The first thing that I would like to share with you from my experience is that for performance indicators to be successfully implemented, you need to involve teachers from the beginning, make a very transparent communication plan where the purposes of the performance indicators, the criteria that will be used, the goals that will be set, will be communicated in the most transparent way. And oftentimes I see institutions where these decisions, they belong to only the board of directors or the owner of the school. And for some reason, this is not really shared with the teachers. And this is usually where teachers become more resentful. They resist a little bit more the idea. So the first thing about implementing performance indicators or changing performance indicators is this engagement plan involving teachers throughout the process. And what is exactly one of the justifications that we can use for this? Bill Gates has a very interesting talk called Our Teachers Deserve Better, and I highly recommend you watch it. I'm not saying it's perfect, but he carried out a lot of research, and he realized that one of the things that teachers receive the least is feedback. As teachers, we have to give feedback to our learners all the time. We have to give them feedback on their performance and how well they are doing, or which areas they can improve, their involvement. But as it turns out, as teachers, we don't usually get that much feedback. What performance indicators do, and this is what we need to help teachers understand, is that performance indicators are not there to simply assess as in a test that will label teachers, but as an opportunity to receive feedback and have the chance to improve performance. So oftentimes performance indicators are communicated and are understood as a negative thing. If we consider that performance indicators, they are a tool for feedback, a tool for learning, and this is a great video that talks a lot about how teachers can receive feedback and the importance of observation, for example, as Karen pointed out. And this can be one of the performance indicators, for example, the learning that is generated through performance, through lesson observation. If teachers are helped to understand that performance indicators are there to inform you and generate learning, they are more likely to buy the idea. So what should we use these performance indicators for? Because that's also a mistake that I've seen in a couple of places. There is the implementation of performance indicators, so a lot of data, a lot of facts and figures, and then nothing is done. Performance indicators, they have to be implemented if they are going to be used somehow. If they are there just to label people or to qualify people without any kind of action, without any kind of plan, they become pointless. Then they can be very negative. Oops, wrong arrow. Correct arrow. There we go. So in general, performance indicators can be defined as data indices of information by which the functional quality of institutions or systems may be measured and evaluated. What I like very much about the beginning of this quote is that we're talking about the quality of the institution or the system. It is not personal. Even though you're very likely, let's say, to assess individual performance as part of this process, what you really want to look at is the quality of the institution as a whole, the quality of the system that you are following. Typically, within the context of specified goals and objectives, performance indicator data are measures of various, and here we go again, various, not just one indicator, but various operational and functional aspects of the organizations and the systems. And they provide evidential basis for determining the extent to which such goals and objectives have been met or are being met. So it is a more scientific, a more pragmatic way of making decisions and looking back and analyzing whether the return on the investment is what you expected. This will inform you, for example, whether you should invest in this particular training course, let's say, or this other development experience. If you have performance indicators, when you have X, let's say $100 to spend on professional development, for instance, you can look at this data, because that's what it is, it's data, and see, when I invested this money here, the result, the performance was improved this much. When I invest the same amount of money in this other initiative, this course or this project or whatever, the performance changed this much. So now I know that when I have a certain amount of money, I can decide whether to invest here or there, aiming at a specific result. This is not usually done. We usually, from my experience again, we usually decide who's going to receive a scholarship to do a course, or which course we're going to buy and offer the teachers, for example, based a lot on seniority or who stands out, for example, without necessarily looking at the expected outcome from that investment and how it affected performance. Another example that is not in professional development, but for example, something that we discuss a lot, is technology. When we invest in technology, and technology can be extremely expensive, if we don't have performance indicators for that particular system that we are investing in, we might be wasting money and not knowing with specific data whether this money was invested well or if it's just been wasted. How do you know if the thousands of dollars that you invested in a learning management system truly improved the performance of your organization or not? You need to have a performance indicator set. And the thing about performance indicators, guys, is that you need to decide which performance indicator you're going to use and be consistent throughout the years. Because the best and most effective way to evaluate the performance is through comparison. A frequent mistake is to change the performance indicator frequently. If you do this, you lose your benchmarking. And then you don't really know whether the investment is better or getting more or fewer results than another investment, for example. So one of the pieces of advice that I can offer you is when you select a performance indicator, you got to stick to it. You can add other performance indicators, but for you to know how much return you're getting, you need to, use consistently the same performance indicator. Guys, can you write 2 or 3 questions? I've just realized that my battery is dying, so there's probably a plug problem. I'll be back in 30 seconds. Then if you could write 2 or 3 questions, that would help me a lot. So one second. And I'm back. Sorry, there was a problem with the plug. So questions, because that will give me some time to breathe as well. If you have a question, that would be very helpful. Natalia. No questions yet, okay. All right, thanks Natalia. So I'll move on. Guys, if you have questions, please ask them because they can really help me fine tune, all right? So what is the process when you implement performance indicators, the process that you want to follow? The first thing that you have to do is to set the standards. So what do you expect from each initiative that you have? For example, when you're observing lessons, what is the standard lesson? I know this is very controversial, extremely personal, but if you want to assess the effectiveness, because it's all about assessing effectiveness, okay? I'm not talking about professional development in the observations. I'm talking about using performance indicators to inform decisions that will generate professional development. So when you are observing lessons, for example, what do you expect from the lesson observations? What are the standards that you expect to find? And then communicate that to the teachers, to the professionals you work with. When you change a system, whether it's an app or a software, or whether it is an approach in the lesson, what are the standards that you would expect to meet? What are the goals? What are the final objectives? So you set all these goals for the performance indicators that you consider relevant to assess the effectiveness of that particular investment. Then you monitor. As I mentioned previously, you monitor throughout a period of time. You need to have consistency because that's the only way you'll get to the benchmarking. And performance indicators, they are more relevant, they are better used when they are compared with each other. If you have a partner school, for example, or a fellow manager who you can contact, and they have the same performance indicator as you can increase your range of benchmarking, and you can get even more information to make your decisions. So this is something that being in a community of leaders and managers will definitely help you with. So you set first you set the performance indicators that you consider important for that measure. Then you have the standards for these performance indicators. You monitor throughout a period. Using performance indicators only once will tell you nothing. Then, as you monitor, you start comparing one result with the other. So you create a benchmarking. that will and should generate reform. So what kind of information will this performance indicator tell you that will generate action? Using performance indicators with no action, pointless. So this should generate some kind of reform. That could be improving slightly a process, or investing in a different thing, dropping something entirely, or even maintaining the level of investment or a system that is already there and is working well. And as you do it, you assign accountability of the process so that you can go back and use the same performance indicator in the following year, for example, to evaluate not only the organization as a whole, but also whoever was responsible for implementing that reform. And you start the cycle again. And you revisit the standards, you monitor again, you look at the benchmarking one more time, you generate further reform, and you might want to revisit accountability or not. Useful educational performance indicators are those that are relevant, cost-effective, timely, reliable, and valid. I know it sounds a bit obvious, but sometimes we implement something that is not very reliable, that is too subjective, for example. This could be useful information, but it's not necessarily a useful performance indicator. The fact that it tells you something interesting doesn't make it a performance indicator automatically. It's only valid if people believe in the performance indicator, if they understand it. And then we go back to communication and engagement and getting teachers to fully buy the idea and understand why these performance indicators were chosen. Ideally, because they participated in the process. And they need to be cost effective, because if it's a performance indicator that costs a fortune for you to run, some kind of research or a survey that is extremely expensive, you're not going to do it on a regular basis. And the performance indicators, they need to be consistent. And this is all related to their capacity to inform. That's, for me, the key word: information, generating information, of a strategic decision-making and decision-taking, resulting in measurable improvements to desired outcomes, especially in student achievement. So how do my students learn better? How do I enhance the quality of their experience? An important guiding principle is that performance indicators or performance indicator data should not be collected for their own sake, because they are needed for specific policy purposes. So as I said before, just implementing the performance indicator without action, without thinking how this will implement or help you implement new things or inform your decision-making process, is not really useful. So what are some of the possible performance indicators? I talked a lot about the importance of engaging teachers, some of the challenges that we face when trying something that is quite different in the education field. I talked a little bit about the process once the performance indicators have already been established. Let's look at some of the possible performance indicators. Once again, the selection of which performance indicator is interesting and is relevant, which is one of the features that we saw in the previous slide, is your context. So what information do you need? What decisions will you have to make? And then what kind of performance do you want to assess? These are some ideas. Student satisfaction with teacher, the academic program, or the institution, or all of them. So how happy are the students? This is quite subjective, but then there are ways to make it a little bit more specific. Getting students to rank from 0 to 10, for example, which is different. And here is the reliability factor. It's different from getting students to give oral feedback or writing their feedback, because that's not so reliable. How do you organize this knowledge? How do you collate this information and then create your benchmarking? So it needs to be a number in that sense. But you're not going to use just one performance indicator to inform your decisions. You're going to have a combination of 3, 4 performance indicators that together will inform your decisions. Another possibility, and this can be quite controversial and uncomfortable, is the student's attrition rate per teacher or per academic program. How many students go back to school? So if you have students that stay with you for a long period of time, for example, and that can decide to drop out or continue the course if they haven't bought the whole package, for example, you can measure how many students come back and relate this to the teacher or the academic program that they are following to see if there is any connection there. Now, the communication of something like this and how it's passed on to teachers is very important, because you don't want teachers to feel that you're monitoring them to assess them personally, but rather you want them to know that this will inform their own teaching. As a teacher, you want to know if students are dropping out because of something that is happening in class, for example, or if you are losing more students than the average, then you can investigate why. Maybe it has nothing to do with your teaching, but maybe it does. Indicators of resource provision and funding, and then of course specified against targets, academic quality of teachers' delivery, the observations that we were talking about. So if you have a combination of attrition rate and quality of teachers, and a teacher is losing a lot of students, but the observations that have been carried out, they inform you, they tell you that the quality of the lesson is within the standard that is expected, then it's important to investigate what might be happening. If the quality of the lesson is within the standard, but this particular teacher is losing more teachers than everybody else, let's investigate, let's see what's happening. Maybe it's just bad luck, but again, if you're measuring it consistently year after year or term after term, you will have more reliable information to help you decide on promotion or development opportunities, whatever it is that you have to invest in. Repetition rates, the students' results in tests, completion of tasks, the size of classes, so teacher-student ratio. This is for managers, especially when it comes to the financial performance of a school, is extremely helpful. Provision of teacher training, as I mentioned. So who participates in in-service professional development? How much do you invest? What do you invest in? And the actual impact on other indicators. Yes, Miguel, it can be, the context can be very, very different. Absolutely. It's important to see how the principle of using indicators to assess performance can be adapted to each context, right? Overall achievement progress indicators, measures of other factors that can affect students' progress rates as well. Measures of impact of strategic interventions for students with special needs and those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So the kind of planning that you make to include these students, is it working or not? How do you know? How exactly are you going to assess if what you have been doing to include these students is working or not? You need to consider what will indicate this. What is the performance indicator that can give you this information? And all of this should be done not to, as I said, just label people or just for you to feel sorry for a bad result or to celebrate a good result, full stop. But all of this will and should be used to inform change, further change. Because as it turns out, we know, the world hates change, but it's the only thing that has brought us progress. So as different and as uncomfortable as implementing performance indicators in your context can be, as much resistance as you may find from teachers, sometimes students, it is extremely important to consider that performance indicators can give you much richer and much more solid information than just a feeling or an open survey, for example. And they will give you the consistency to make decisions on investments that can truly impact student outcomes and their experience as a whole. So, guys, this is a little bit of what I wanted to share with you. There's a lot when it comes to performance indicators, especially in the educational context, which is something that can be quite uncomfortable sometimes. But I would love to see if you have questions. I would love to read your questions, or maybe sharing your experiences. I don't know, do you work with performance indicators already? Is this something that is part of your context? I would love to take this opportunity to learn a little bit more about the different contexts, as Michela pointed out. It's not well planned. Absolutely. It's one of the biggest challenges. The intention is good, but the planning sometimes fails. Involving the whole community, the whole staff in the process is vital, because the staff can point out where the plan is not solid. So yes, this is something that can give performance indicators a bad name, the way that they are implemented. Rodrigo has never worked with performance indicators. Rodrigo, to work with the management of teachers in a regular school, in a language center university context. University. There are many universities trying to implement performance indicators, and that should be quite interesting. And again, as Michela pointed out, sometimes the intention is very good. The performance indicator is not very valid. It doesn't really match what is done and what kind of information you want to get. So yeah, materials for young learners. Luis, I don't know off the cuff any material on performance indicators specifically for young learners, but once you understand the theory behind it, you can choose the performance indicators that are most suitable to your context. I think that this is the key point here. The leader, the manager, together with the staff will say, okay, in our context, so we work with children, we work with young learners, what are the important features of performance that we want to assess? Then you select the performance indicators that are relevant to you. Karen works in a language school in Geneva, and they have performance indicators, very interesting observations, feedback from students, and the feedback seems to be given if something is wrong. I feel the feedback seems to be, oh, okay, not enough feedback being given to teachers. This is also something that is an opportunity for development in many contexts. You get the information, and then the information is not necessarily passed on to the people involved in a transparent way. And sometimes it's kept with the decision makers, or it's only passed on in the negative sense. So this is wrong. This is not a very useful way of dealing with performance indicators. The information needs to be passed on to everyone that was involved, whether teachers or students. The more transparent the process is, the more comfortable and richer it will be. And exactly, so as Karen pointed out, it's not just saying this was wrong, this has to improve, but also let's look at what has been working so that we can maintain these initiatives and these things that we're doing. So a combination of transparency and consistency in both identifying what has to be improved, but also what is working. And I think that a lot of institutions have great intentions when they implement performance indicators, but sometimes as life goes on, they lack the, let's say, the coolness to step back, look at all the data, and think strategically, what am I going to do with this data? This will inform my actions, my decisions, but this should also be passed on to everyone that is affected. They need to know how well they are doing. So yes, very good point, Karen. Thank you so much for sharing. Luis, I don't know if I helped you with the young learners suggestion, but I really believe that getting, whenever possible, right? the community to work together and discussing the performance indicators that are relevant to your context will generate better results. Michela says that when she started teaching at the beginning of her career, she understood the importance of teaching or institution evaluation. But unfortunately, what I've seen until now is complete lack of evaluation or evaluation with the purpose of punishment instead of improvement. Michela, I have to agree with you. I think that's a little bit my experience on many occasions, not all the time. I think that there is a lot of very good work being done where the evaluation is really formative. It really aims at raising data that will be useful for improvement, for growth, for change, for learning, and not just punishment or listing problems and issues. But this has a lot to do with the attitude that you have as a leader, as a manager, towards performance and towards performance indicators. Performance indicators, they are a tool. That's all they are. And just like any tool, it depends on who's using the tool. A tool can be used to produce something beautiful, something great, but it can be used to hurt somebody as well. Performance indicators as a tool can be used to generate knowledge, engagement, promote change, but they can also be used to hurt. It depends a lot on how you use that particular tool. And Natalia mentions that you also face evaluation for punishment. And that's one of the reasons why I like talking about performance indicators, because I think that a lot of people's experience when it comes to performance indicator has been negative, but it doesn't need to be negative. That's the point that I want to make. I'm also going to leave the slide with some of the reference material on, if you want to read a little bit more about it and maybe research different people talking about performance indicators. Right. My focus is a lot on performance indicators in the educational context, but you can find a lot of reading if you look for performance indicators overall. There's a lot of learning that can happen if you just look at performance indicators as a concept, as a theory in other fields, not just in education and teaching and learning. I have multiple attendees are typing, so let's see what's going to come up. Luisa was thinking about this specific group, not only because it's my teaching context, great, but because I can see it's very subjective. Yes, the questionnaire where students rate the quality of teachers, teaching material usually doesn't work for younger learners nor teens. But then you need to know if this is how you want to check the performance of the system or the organization or the process. Sometimes you want to check parents' satisfaction. It is something that can inform a lot your decisions, because maybe the child cannot necessarily assess their experience on a piece of paper, for example, or giving a number, but the parents can, and they will give you information that can determine your decisions. Andy, I know it feels like this is imposed from above, but is there an opportunity to make your own route with the confines of the system? Great question. Work with the teachers to devise something which doesn't exactly go against the system, but allows for great points that Andy raised. I think that it's always important for us to think how we can make our contributions and become greater protagonists of the process. So yeah, that would be interesting to know if you feel that you have an opportunity to, make your own routes and maybe use the information from the performance indicators to your own benefits. Michela says that sometimes she thinks that in Italy there is no interest in that because we work in a very difficult environment. So the problems which could be highlighted are difficult to cope with, such as the number of students in class, the number of students with special needs and equipment, and etc. One of the things that performance indicators can do, however, it can raise data to get institutions to revisit some of these decisions. I know it's very hard sometimes for us as teachers to implement, for example, a performance indicator system. But I think that sometimes we can have our own performance indicators informally implemented and gather data that can later be used as an argument to advocate for different systems for different conditions. It's just a thought. I know it can be hard sometimes, but if performance indicators provide us with data, and data can generate change and inform management, maybe we can implement something that doesn't need to be top down, that can be done in the realms of our own practice to raise more information and hopefully inform the management. It could bring about change, Karen. I agree. Yeah, and change that comes from solid knowledge and not just a feeling, an opinion. Because I think that a lot is done with excellent intentions, but from I believe this is better, I think this works. Especially in business overall, but especially in education. Parents, yes, great, Luisa, yes. I mean, if you have a stakeholder that is really important, you might want to consider that as an indicator that you want to raise. Okay, well, I don't know, I guess that's it. No more questions, no more action there. Andy, what do you say? Oh, Karen is typing.
Well,
guys, I would like to thank you.
A couple more people still typing, but we can slowly wrap up.
Andy, before you wrap up, I'd like to thank everyone who was here. Thank you so much, guys. This means a lot to me, and I really need to thank the Leadership and Management SIG for all the work that they've been doing and for this great invitation. I feel truly honored to share a little bit of my experience and especially, discuss these issues with you. Your questions and your comments, they've been really insightful. Thank you very much. And thanks, Andy, once again.
No, you're more than welcome. Thank you, Vinny. It's been really, I think it's a very, very interesting talk. I really enjoyed it. And I think there's a lot to work with there. I don't know how many of you who are attending are members of LAMSIG. There was a great article about 2 issues of our newsletter ago by an Oliver Beaumont. I don't know if you remember this article, Vinny, where he'd been he'd come up with his own, working with his teachers, come up with his own performance indicators for it was a private language school in the UK. And it's a really, really interesting article. It's based on the work of a guy called Henry Stewart, who wrote a book called The Happy Manifesto, which I think I'm going to write it there. I've put a link there for The Happy Manifesto, but that's nothing to do with ELT or education particularly. But it's an interesting book, and I'd recommend it anyway. But if you have the chance to check out Oliver Beaumont's article, I think it was 2 issues ago, and I'll put the recording of this webinar on the website once we finish, and with that I'll put as a couple of links if I can. I know we don't have a link up yet for Oliver's article but I think it's possible to buy the newsletter even if you're not a member. You can. I think it's something like $4 or £4 to buy a newsletter through IATEFL. So that's something that's very worth looking into. But thanks very much, Vinny. It's been really, really, I think it was a really, really interesting talk. It was great for you to give up your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. And thank you all for coming. We have 11 people currently here. I think over the course of the time, a couple of people have come and gone. We've had about 15 people here, and I'm hoping that we get a lot of people who get to watch it, not live, but at least be able to see what Vinny had to talk about, because I thought it was really interesting, and I think it's very useful for everybody, actually.
Thanks a lot.
So thank you all. Good question, Michaela, and I'm not sure of what the answer is. I will ask IATEFL, and if you send me your email address, let me write my email address here, and I will follow up on that for you. I can't give you an answer right now because I'm not sure. So if you write me an email to that address, I will follow up and see if that's possible to get you a certificate of attendance. Okay, Well, thanks very much, everyone. And
Thank
again,
you.
thanks again, Vinny. Bye, everyone.